is good to be here today. And I think it's good for us like minds and supportive and communities of healing to get together like this. It feels good actually to know that we're all striving toward the same thing, and it seems like we're in a season of the world where there's such disparity in thought, and it really is good to be here today. I really mean that. So the last few weeks we've covered so many things in the last I think it's 10 weeks now. Last 10 weeks, and we started in December. So last 10 weeks we've covered so many things. And really it's all the bottom line for everything we do is looking at taking what we call trauma. Remember, trauma is overwhelm stored in our body, and it looks like this. It looks like anxiety and ADHD and a lot of other maybe mental or behavioral health maladies. And we call that trauma, because that's the common word. But us calling it overwhelm is reclaiming the narrative, because we know we have tools. I feel overwhelmed on a regular basis, and so we have tools to address those things. And so understanding that the person at your table, your family, your honey, your friend in the car at Walmart is feeling that sense of overwhelm right now. And we have talked about so many tools over the last 10 weeks. So the last couple tools, the last few weeks rather, have been Peter Levine's somatic experiencing, getting to understand, increasing somatic literacy, understanding the information the body's giving, and rather than labeling it as stress, anxiety, hurt, anger, whatever it is, rather than labeling that, we wait and just kind of get to know the information. And once we get to know the information, we become more sovereign in, well, here's what I'm going to do with this information. I'm not going to react. I'm not going to respond in a way that trauma wants me to. I'm going to respond in a way that a sovereign being does. Boom, come on. I'm responding. I love that. I'm going to say it again. I'm going to respond in a way that a sovereign being does. And so being able to say, well, I feel like this. What do I want to do with it? Let me wait for a second. And then letting the body relearn, refire, rewire. Awesome. So as we move forward, I thought, well, let me break it down into, I'm going to talk a lot about kids for the next several weeks, because I get a lot of emails about kids, what it looks like. And so I really want to park on them for a while. And then I want to look at the different, kind of turning the mirror toward me as an adult, is saying, what can I do as a parent or an adult as a role in the life of a child? And there's different types of parenting that actually contribute, maybe not as obviously, but to the sense of overwhelm that's stored in kids. So we're going to explore that stuff. We're going to look at emotional freedom techniques. We may dive into a little deeper end of Bessel van der Kolk's work, and that our time's going to be up, for crying out loud. It's going to go by so fast. I'm really looking forward to it. I love organizing those things. So I get to reread them again and dive into it. And so my brain gets all wrinkled just by reading this stuff all over again. And every time I come across something new or interesting, I'll be sharing it with you guys. And also, Annie and I have been talking about an exciting new project, which I won't share yet, but maybe toward the end, we'll share some deets on that. For those of you who aren't cool, deets means details, for our exciting new project. So today, we're just going to dive into some of the younger kids. So do you remember our tornado? I told you about our tornado. After our tornado, it settled in my family in different ways. Gracie's, at the time she was 6, Parks was 2. Gracie's was constriction. Remember the 4 horsemen of trauma. So she would be more tight. She carried herself more tightly. Actually ate differently, ate more, which was a self-medication, because you get endorphins when you eat. So she started eating more. And matter of fact, after the tornado, for a couple months, she would have nightmares about giants. And it's funny because they were giant inanimate objects, like a carrot or a tomato. and it was stepping on our house in Oklahoma. And that's the way that it, because she didn't know what the tornado looked like. So she plugged in what she didn't know what something looked like. It was a carrot and a tomato. And the night after the tornado, we stayed at a hotel there in Norman, Oklahoma. And I was laying there, it was probably about 4 a.m. And I felt a rub on my arm like this. I felt a rub on my arm. And I look up and it's Grace, she's a little 6-year-old. She said, Dad. And I said, yeah, baby. And she told me she wet the bed. And I said, oh, poor thing. Well, let's get you out of those clothes. And I said, let's go in the shower. And I said, she had a bad dream. And the dream was so terrifying to her that she lost control of her body and ended up, she hadn't wet the bed in years at that point, lost control of her body and wet the bed. It was so fearful for her that I can't even fathom something like that being so scary to that little brain, that little mind, that little soul, that little spirit, that she couldn't control her body anymore. And it just broke my heart. Oh my goodness. And so it ended up being like 4:30 in the morning. And I said, you want to go on an adventure? And she said, okay, because she didn't want to go back to bed. I said, you want back to sleep? She said, no. I said, you want to go on an adventure? So we went on an adventure, went to IHOP. That's kind of adventures we go on. International House of Pancakes there in town. And we're sitting there, and the girl who just lost everything, all of her little dolls and all of her toys, and couldn't control herself out of fear that morning. We're sitting there at IHOP and the sun starts to come up. And she said, isn't that beautiful, Daddy? 6 years old. Isn't that beautiful, Daddy? And I just started crying. I had a lump in my throat because the resiliency shown in young people is a beautiful, amazing thing. And if we can scaffold things well for our young people, they have genetic inherent strength, power in them. And if we can set them up in our homes for successful pendulation, if we create safety in our homes, when there's trauma that comes along, they have tools already. And we just keep scaffolding them and building them and building them and building them. And that was an awesome moment for me because I just got it. And she just got it. I mean, she's gotten rid of the symptoms. That girl is, I hope she gets to meet you guys someday because she just stacks sovereign moments on sovereign moments now. So it's pretty cool. So it's possible. So I want to talk about how, and I tell you that because I want to start off everything and end everything with hope, possibility, potential for ourselves, our kids, our communities. It's there. It's there. We just got to start tapping into it, leaning into it a little bit more, claiming our sovereignty in these. So remember, the event was over. We weren't in a tornado anymore, but her body was responding like she was still in a tornado, so fearful that that's probably how she felt during the tornado. And so she was just reacting in the way that felt familiar. This was happening all over again. Her body says, I know what this. And at that moment, in the freeze, remember, fight, flight, or freeze. Trauma is in the freeze, and freeze is the incapacity to defend themselves. Cowering in a closet, the incapacity to defend themselves. And kids, young people, toddlers, children, infants, are particularly susceptible to the freeze, because they just have different resources than we have as adults. So they're extra vulnerable to being traumatized. And we really need to circle our kids and protect them, nurture them, bring them along. Look at the ways that our parenting is good in good ways, and look at the ways that it's traumatized parenting, that maybe we're harsher, maybe we're more distant, maybe we can't connect. Maybe we have trouble with the nurturing word. I have a lot of people say, well, Indians, we don't nurture. That's how we are. And that's not true. You can go back not too many generations, and that's who we were. We were nurturing. We brought our kids along. The kids were with the dad, learning how to fish and hunt and grow, and were protected. We weren't allowed to hit kids because some tribes, if generations ago, if you hit your child, you could be banished from the tribe. If you hit your spouse, you could be banished from the tribe. So unlearning the way that trauma has taught us to be adults, and learning new, better, different ways in nurturing this generation, this upcoming generation. That's going to be awesome. So let's keep diving into this. So the children are different than us. And I say us because I got my 3 chocolate kids sitting right out the door. They're right there. They're different than us. Their brain is so not developed. Remember if you go way back to maybe even our first session, the child's brain, when they're born, it's only 17% done developing. The big push ends at like 24 years old. So they have to develop 83% of their brain, the physical structure of the brain, the neurogenesis, how it's firing, the synaptogenesis, how the synapses are firing and talking to each other. They have to do 83% of that outside the womb. They're doing it in your home, in the community, in the car, at the powwow, at the basketball game, at the ceremony, whatever they're doing. And so that goes on. And for the big push is 24 years. Well, we know that it lasts throughout the lifetime, but the big push is 24 years. So you think about your kids now. I think about my 3 kids. Grace is 17, Jack, Parks is 13, Jack is 9. So they're kind of different. They're different markers in just simply their brain development. And we let Grace do things we don't let Parks do because there are different stages. We don't let Jack do things that Parks does because they're not at the same stage of development, and they don't have the cognitive capacity, the brain capacity to understand certain things. Even we told our kids, just don't date because it's getting that emotionally crushed at a time where your brain can understand the complexities of relationships, that can be harming to them. So we say, just don't date. And a lot of kids will start dating young because they're trying to get their bucket filled, and maybe they're not getting their bucket filled at home, or from healthy relationships. So they start dressing differently and behaving differently because they're looking for somebody to fill their bucket. And so as adults, as we nurture, bring kids along in good ways, we fill their buckets with, here's how we are as a family. Here's how we behave. Here's what you do at ceremony. Here's what you do at powwow. Here's what you do in sports. Here's how we act as a group of people, as a clan, and our clanship systems. Here's how we do it as a tribe. So bringing them along, behaving as we should within this group. And it's okay to have expectations. It's okay to have expectations because their little brains they want to know, how do I do this? You can't leave a brain that is 20% done cooking, done developing, to say, well, here's how everything should be, because it's 20% done developing. So part of their physical brain development is looking at mom and dad and the adults in the homes and saying, how does the world rotate? And feed me this, fill my bucket on these things. Their level of reasoning is different. They don't have the cognitive capacity to know. One of the predictors of if an event like COVID or an abuse or tornado is going to be traumatic is, what was the stage of life of the child or the adult? Now, an adult is going to experience a car accident different than the child does, or a tornado different than a child does, because their level of reasoning is just different. Their perceptual development, how they understand this connects with this relates to this, how all the things are interconnected, their perception. Again, somewhere we've gotten to the point, and this is maybe I'll try to give it a word, in defense of trauma-proofing our children. That sounds pretty cool. The Peter Levine book. In defense of trauma-proofing our children is nurturing, bringing them along, helping with here's how the world rotates, not giving them so much credit, not having them raise themselves. They definitely cannot raise themselves. We're setting them up for trauma and behavior problems if we become free range, because the little brain needs scaffolding. That's how it knows it's part of something. And as it develops, it has to know it's part of something. So they have incomplete personality formation. They have tendencies. Jack, at 9 years old, you can see that he's quieter. He likes to read. He likes to play music. He's not that much into playing catch with Parks and I. Those are tendencies for him, but it's incomplete personality formation. Grace is very different now than she was when she was 9. But there is an 8-year difference in cognitive development and physical brain development. They're more dependent on the adult for our thoughts, good and valid. What does that mean? I've shared this with you previously, but I think it warrants revisiting. Is in the digital age, I don't think it's a coincidence that in the digital age there is just spikes in oppositional defiance, attention deficit. I don't think it's a coincidence that we can make our world do this and have this little spot be action-packed and bright and noisy. And you ever notice how noisy cartoons are these days? Crying out loud. And so making the world this, and then saying, well, put that down and pick up a book. What? Are you kidding me? I don't even want to do that. So making them, in the digital age, even we have, as adults, have become sucked into that. And I'm guilty as well, because I like to read things on my phone. I go shopping on my phone just before the movie started. This started. I wanted to see if there was a movie in my area. So I was sitting on my phone. Now, why am I picking on digital stuff? Because it disconnects me. I'm in the room, but I'm not attuned. And that's the key to healthy child development, is attunement, connection. We've talked about that many times, and we'll talk about it more again in the future. Attunement is knowing the emotional states, being present and attuned. Knowing the emotional states of my kids and having them attune to me in any given situation. But our little buddy here, my iPhone 1, I think I've told you, I think it's coal powered, or maybe wood. It might be wood powered. I gotta go out and chop wood so my phone will work. Anyway, when children are speaking to their parents and their parents are doing this. Here. Oh, oh, that's funny. That's hilarious. You're still funny. We do things like that. If it's hilarious, you probably wouldn't be able to, if it truly was hilarious, you wouldn't be able to say it's hilarious because you'd be laughing. But that's so funny. And so the child saying these things and not getting any kind of feedback about it. Kids require, I'm talking about trauma-proofing our kids for the love of trauma-proofing our kids. They require us to turn and look at them, and their brain says, oh, I get it. You're paying attention to me now. I'm attuned. The stress parts of my brain can relax, and we're connecting. That's just essential to a child's brain. And you got to have these markers met early in life. So unless we turn and do that and look at the kids, their brain's not sure if it's a valid thought, because they look at the adult to know what is valid in this moment. So if I turn and look at them and I say, that's awesome, good job, then their brain says, oh, that was a valid thought, that's a good one, that's a keeper. So when the boys and Gracie, when I pick them up from school and they say something like, Dad, I got a 90 on my math test today, I'll before you leave the parking lot, I'll look at them and say, that's awesome, dude. That's awesome. You must have worked really hard on that. And they'll say, I did. It's a good job. And I turn and look at them and make that connection. Otherwise, they're not sure if that's valid. I mean, if I'm saying like they're doing this, well, that's awesome, sweet. Their brain says, I don't know. I don't know where to file this. Is this a valid one or is it not a valid one? So then I'll say focus on effort. Effort being when I said you must try really hard on that. I didn't say you must be super smart, because then their brain says, yeah, I got an A this time, so I'm super smart. So next time they come home with a 29 on it, and I'll say, oh. And their brain says, I got 29, I must be dumb. So part of trauma proofing is letting them know that good outcomes, you get better outcomes with effort. It's not a reflection of dumb smart. It's how engaged you want to be with that. So they just present different than we do, because they're not us. They're at a different stage than we are. Us functioning well. Hold on. Speaking of which, check this out. Check out this cup. Arizona Cardinals. My son drew that. And it holds hot water. Okay. Adults, when functioning well, and I emphasize when functioning well, we have a grown-up brain. We have all of our things have been firing and wiring in us for a long time. So the good experiences, not so good experiences, it all shapes, molds how the brain fires and wires. So let's just say we had pretty solid experiences. We have different resources. We have freedom to access resources. So as an adult, let's say I'm stressed today. I'm not particularly stressed, but if I was stressed, I could go out and go running today because I'm a sovereign adult and I want to go for a run today because I feel stressed. My 9-year-old can't do that. He can't make that decision. We're in town now. So my 13-year-old, I know when you want Gracie running in town because I want to protect her. And so we're here in the city in Phoenix, so I have to be aware of those things. So they don't even have that kind of agency that I have. I can go say, well, I'm a big Indian dude and I'm gonna go running. They should be scared of me. So I can access my resources. I can pick up the guitar. I can talk to my friends. I can drive to the movie, things like this that a kid can't do. A child doesn't have those kind of resources. They can't access the same resources that we have. And unless they're taught resources, they try to create something that makes them feel better. That's why there's so many kids addicted to this. Maybe a newer version, hopefully a newer version. They're addicted to that because that's their resource. And until parents, we can start standing in the gap and saying, I can be a resource. And this is a hard thing because I know we're all stretched so thin. We are all stretched so thin. But trauma-proofing your kids, as we dive into what these symptoms look like from preschool through high school over the next few sessions. A big part of trauma-proofing our kids is recognize that parenting can never be a spectator sport. I'm not talking about helicopter parenting. I'm saying engage, attune, connect. And as they grow older, they'll pull away and start establishing their own interests and own autonomy. And that's good. That's what we want them to have. We want them to be able to feel confident, because even though my 3 little buggers are I just adore them 3 little buggers. My goal is to make them adults. Functioning well native adults that are contributing to our people. That's my goal with my 3 kids. More than being happy, more than just giving them things, my goal is for them to be happy and contribute. And so we have to dive in, trauma-proofing our kids, diving in and connecting, and then knowing when to allow autonomy. Allowing them to gain resources, teaching them resources to address their own stressors, their own anxiety that they get empowerment from. We as adults, we may have labels for feelings. We may have higher somatic literacy. So in addition to somatic literacy, knowing this information, having this breadth of how we can label feelings. There is more than anger and happiness. But think about the traumatized folks that you know. It's all of this. It could be frustration, it could be hurt, it could be sadness, but it's all funneled into anger. And so they don't have a full gamut of the label of what this sensation is. That's why we practice it. That's why we get to know, because hurt and frustration aren't the same thing. But if we're funneling everything into anger, guess what we're teaching our kids? That is the most legit and the only one. And so we're not teaching them this full gamut of even understanding the somatic that sets us up for these labels. And so it doesn't have to filter down into just anger. It says, well, I'm labeling this hurt right now, and let me see how I express my hurt. Can I express it in a good way? Has it been modeled for me in a good way? When as adults, just like kids, if we can't access these resources of healthy and well ways of addressing stress, anger, frustration, hurt, if we don't access, we may act out. Some people act in. We may act out or in. Drugs, drinking, violence. We were trying to find that external tool to address because I haven't been taught these things, or I haven't learned these things, or I haven't created these things in me. Kids have just a very limited behavioral menu when it comes to trauma. Remember, we talked about the four horsemen. Hyperarousal, moving constantly, constriction, they're tight like this, more likely to have some health problems, numbing, dissociating, unplugging. That's kind of what kids are, or adults, but we see it most common in kids. Remember, because their autonomic system is still little, it hasn't grown. Yours is a full grown one, and you can still experience those things. But by the time you get to 25, 30 years old, you kind of say, well, here's my tool of choice when I feel overwhelmed: eating, smoking, drinking, using, or in good ways. I keep pathologizing, but in good ways: going for a run, talking to my honey, playing guitar, praying, singing. And that's really, I can't make your list for you. I kind of just gave you my list. I pray all the time. I prayed before we started. I prayed that I could find the link to this Zoom thing. So think about, just as we're talking, I'll get parents come in and they'll say something's wrong with my kid. And then they'll describe a chaotic home. I'm coming to find out the child is just reflecting what's going on in the home. They're reflecting, they need to be electrically charged to live in that environment. So it's tough on the child. It's tough on them. And their modeling, their scaffolding is about chaos. Their social referencing is about chaos. They're not teaching the kid, the children, the somatic base, the labeling, the understanding of what an emotion is. All that is a recipe for chaos for a child. And then they'll come in and blame the child. And I don't think that's fair to the child. And so I let the parent know that we have to create something different for the child. And I emphasize our love. It doesn't mean that in our community we don't love our kids. We love the heck out of our kids. It's just that through many of the traumas that have been passed down historically, are able to show it, express it, nurture it, has kind of become stunted, blunted in our communities. And here's what's amazing. Let me pause here for a second. Is if you're on this or you are watching this, I'm probably not even talking about you. Okay? Because if you're on this or watching this, you're saying, I kind of want something different, or I have some knowledge already. I just want to see what else there is out there. I'm already talking to the folks that are doing great things in the community. So this is really, really just to inform how we can help others in our communities. So thank you for being who you are. So let's break it down to just the different age groups. So in infancy, let me do this real quick. In infancy, well, remember that stress, and we've known this forever in our Native communities. We've known about blood memory, which is now called epigenetics. We've known about the child experiencing the same thing the mother experiences prenatally. So let's just start there. We've had a lot of tough stuff happen to us in our communities, on our reses, for hundreds of years. So remember that. And then we've gotten away from, and not universally, and this is talking about the rough ends. So here's our normal curve. Here's the rough ends. Understanding that the 9 months that a mother is pregnant is really sacred, and the child experiences everything that the mother's experiencing. The child can be, if the mother's stressed, the child is stressed. If the mother's drinking, the child's drinking. Whatever the mother's doing, the child is experiencing all those things. And if we start out with stress in the womb, it affects the development of the child within the womb. Those children, and I've shared this with you when you talk about brain development, but again, revisiting how it's going to go through our lives here, is those kids will have smaller head circumference if they've had chronic stress. They'll smaller limbs. They may be inconsolable. They just will not stop crying, or they don't cry at all. They don't cry at all. And kids are supposed to cry. That's how they tell you if they're wet, if they're hungry, if they're tired. That's the only voice they have. That's the only language they got. So, and I've seen parents say, "Oh, there's just a good baby. They never cry." And it's weird because they come from such a stressful home, but they just never cry. What a good baby. And that's like a red flag for me. Because then that child is telling me that I need help. I've got some stress going on here. So it's not necessarily a good child. It's a child. That child isn't necessarily good or bad. It's just a child that's overwhelmed right now, and they don't have any way of expressing. So they need to create safety, calm, quiet safety for that child's brain to recover. Because in the future, we may be seeing that child, and this guy will say, "Well, it looks like they have ADHD, according to this thing, or a learning disability, or delayed in speech." Those are the common things I hear. And whenever somebody comes in about ADHD, I'll ask them, were they delayed in speech? Let's say they're school age now. I'll ask them, were they delayed in speech? And they'll say, yeah. And that just tells me this has been long standing. And so that they have of different tests, they're not meeting markers. They're not as social. They have fewer words in measures of what we would call IQ, of meeting those markers. And there's a delay in that, very common delay in that, because remember, stress is all about survival. Overwhelm is all about survival. So imagine being in the womb and having it all be about survival. We're supposed to be the safest place you'll ever know. It's all about survival. So just early in life, even in the womb, creating opportunity for peace, for calm. And then, so they enter the world. And I was working with a group in Portland, some tribes up there, and they had adopted a child. Here's kind of what we're talking about. One of the people in the audience, kind of what we're talking about. She raised her hand. She shared that she adopted a child that came from this toxic pregnancy and had significant delays. And they made the first year, this is amazing to me, They made the first year of that child's life like the fourth trimester. I don't know how that, don't do the math on that, but it was a year-long trimester. And she said, after that year, she said, we made sure the house was quiet. They really committed admirably. This Native family up in the Portland area really committed to healing that child. And they made a year-long, let's be quieter. Let's not have any loud noises. Let's hold, comfort, warm, fed. And that child bounced back like you would not believe. Caught up with all markers, surpassed the markers. Because they met markers. And the first environment is the most important environment. And so they met the markers of what that child's brain, how the creator put that in her head to say, let me just make sure you're going to survive. And that child, all these things, what it needed to survive was this little constricted child, because surviving was protection, protection, protection. And when those protection markers, where those safety markers were met, that child just bloomed. Oh my goodness, isn't that an awesome story? Because it informs us that it's doable, it's possible. Whew. Hold on, I'm pound my desk for a second. Take a drink. Whew. Okay. So let's move them into school age now. So preschool. Symptoms in preschool. Let's say there's, and this is what when I would talk to educators or young parents about, particularly when our kids go into unfamiliar environments, we're not sure of everybody who's there. We want to make sure that everything's okay with our child. And this is all about attunement. We have a baseline. We know how our kids are, and anything that shifts from that informs us. There you go. And this is where we dive in. Parenting is not a spectator sport. We dive in. We know the states of our children, trauma-proofing our kids. In praise of trauma-proofing our kids, we know the states. We know the things they say, how they look, their small facial changes when they're stressed, when they're happy, when they're angry, their posturing. We are totally attuned and engaged with them. That's just time and presence and attuning. That's what that is, just being with them. And not being with them doing this, but being with them and being present. So let's say things change in how trauma might start presenting itself. Developing new fears, things that weren't present. Oh, I don't want to go there, and I don't want to go there anymore. I don't want to go to school anymore. I don't want to school anymore. He's scary. I don't want to leave the house. Please leave the light on. Don't leave me. Developing those new fears. Avoidance behaviors kind of tie those, because we avoid what we're scared of. We avoid the things that make us uncomfortable. We do that as adults. I don't want to go to that party. There are a bunch of doofuses are going to be there. I don't want to do that. I don't want to go to college. I don't want to take that job. We avoid the things that make us uncomfortable. We lean into the things that do make us comfortable. That's why your kids, and I'm sure this is the group that is on this webinar now, your kids come up to you when they were little and you were in public. They would come up and make sure they were near you because you felt safe. They knew that you were the safe one and that you created a sense of comfort in them. So they sought you out. It's because we go toward the things that make us feel safe and comfortable, and we avoid things that make us feel uncomfortable. And that's just, that goes throughout the lifetime. As we get older, we discern, we decide, well, this makes me uncomfortable, but it's a healthy risk, so I'm going to do it. We make that decision as long as we know that we have the capacities, the tools to address what this discomfort is. Because we have different resources as adults. Kids don't have resources, so they just avoid it because it's uncomfortable. Connected, attuned parents will be able to create comfort. And let's say it's a healthy thing, going to school, the first day in class, going to the doctor, going to the dentist. The attuned parent will be able to connect with the child and maybe be present with them in the capacities that they can and help them lean into it, so they know that this is uncomfortable, but it's a healthy risk. And you have the tools to address this. You can lean into this. It doesn't have to be limiting for you. So that's the avoidance behaviors. They may have more irritability. They may have a hair trigger more. They may get emotional more quickly. They may get angry more quickly. Because if you remember the autonomic system, and here's the sympathetic system, and here's the parasympathetic system. The sympathetic is what gets us jacked up for survival stuff. And this is what calms us down, a calm alertness, good digestion, things that are over here. But over here is kind of a hair trigger. So something has happened, or they have been traumatized previously, they're more irritable. So it doesn't come here, it goes boom, boom, boom. They go from leg just moving constantly to irritability, anger. They may withdraw, constriction, they may shut down. I see this a lot in schools, students sitting in the corner, their head down like this, little kids. Because input can be overwhelming. And so they're just trying to constrict the level of input, the level of people. So they kind of shut down. Impulsive behaviors, throwing things, and anything really that would probably fit into my little book here as ADHD. Outbursts of noise, words, screaming, throwing, kicking, hitting, the inability to it's almost like this charge just kind of, and it looks like some impulsive behavior. Impulse control is one of the markers that we can see that we're winning the battle. Is something changes in the room and they're able to sit there and not yell about it, talk about it, scream about it, move constantly, create chaos. They're able to observe it and not act on those impulses. And that's all the stuff we've been talking about all along, is the tools we've been talking about all along. That can help with everything we're talking about here. Also with a traumatized child in preschool age, it's maybe their developmental markers aren't being met. And that's easier to see because when it's just us and our kids at the house here, they're not around other kids. So I'm not sure, are they the same height? Are they saying the same amount of words? And not until they get around other kids do you really start to say, oh, this one does this and this one does this. So we get to see developmental markers more clearly when they get around other kids. And so maybe they're not learning enough words, maybe their eye contact is differently. So the traumatized child will be delayed in those milestones. Potty training on time, walking, talking, crawling. Should have a pretty good wealth of words by the time they hit preschool. So if they're delayed in any of those things, they may start missing those markers because the brain is still trying to survive. Doesn't make them broken, doesn't make them ruined, doesn't make them wrong. It just makes you saying, oh, well, we need to help with the environment for this child. They maybe have a different type of play in preschool. Like play is supposed to have a flow. Let's say this is a car, okay? And I play with it and I come with my computer and I jump. And let's say I'm playing with my son, Jack, and he comes up my head and my nose, which is a really big jump, like that, and then he lands here. Okay, there's a certain flow to play. Same if you're playing with dolls, maybe or action figures. That's what I used. They stand a certain way, they talk a certain way. But if a traumatized child there's no flow in the play. The cars would they'll just do this, like that with the cars, or they'll hit them on the desk, or somehow the toys are mean to each other, or maybe touching each other inappropriately, depending what the trauma is, so that there's not a flow to play. And play is super important. We're going to talk more about play in the future, and the value of play for our kids. But it's super important in imagination development, in relationship development, and fluidity of thought. we'll talk more about that in the future. And the last one for today is disrupted sleep patterns. Let me dive into that a little bit, because I don't want to make it sound like you have to have this regiments, because you can go to the far end and everything becomes regimented, and that becomes stressful for the child as well. But I'm saying there's structure. The child's brain just likes structure. When there's lack of structure, that actually creates chaos in the brain, because there's so much, and the child's brain hasn't developed enough to create its own structure. So kids will just be all over the place, being chaos. They'll be eating dirt and who knows what else. So it's just, the child's brain actually craves structure. So having a bedtime is great for the child's brain. Even more important, having a wake up time is great for the child's brain. And that's one of the things that I think when we start school again after COVID season, that's going to be tough, because it's been harder. I mean, I got 3 kids, all of mine are remote learning. It's harder to have the structure of school when Carminda and I are doing the teaching, mainly her. So having structure in times has been more difficult. So but once we start again and getting the structure again, do those sleep patterns become disrupted? Are they consistent? Do they not want to fall asleep? Do they avoid going to their bedroom? Do they avoid staying asleep? Can they stay asleep? Do they wake up in the middle of the night? Many times they sleep and sleep and sleep and sleep and sleep. We just want to look at extremes in really just change of patterns. That's how we start to know that our preschoolers are experiencing some level of duress. They may have physical problems, physical complaints, headaches, my legs just feel funny, stomach problems. Kind of look out for those things, or they may regress to an earlier age. So let's say they're talking pretty good, but then they start doing big time baby talk, or they start clinging. Like let's say they've been, and this is just the process of maturing, is they expand their circle a little bit more and a little bit more. They're okay getting a little further away from you, and then for some reason they regress. And they're back here on your lap crying and talking about again, like that. Those are just things that to be aware of. I don't want to pathologize, but the research shows that trauma in preschoolers can show up in this way. Now, again, you guys you're already leaning into it. So, I mean, we're probably talking about other folks, but creating safety, consistency, some structure, wake up times, good nutrition in the homes is going to go a long way, and attuning that's going to go a long way into healing the child. But what can't happen, what shouldn't be happening, is that child has had all this stuff going on, and then taking them to the doctor saying something's wrong with my child. I as the parent have to look at what system am I making for my child to live in. Again, I don't think we're talking about anybody on this call, otherwise you wouldn't be on the call. So next time we're going to keep diving in infant, grade school, high school. We'll talk about what suicidality looks like. We're going to keep diving in and diving in, diving in. And really the foundation is we have the tools. We just want to know now, what should we look for? We've talked about tools for the last 10 weeks. Now we say, what should we look for that I can apply some of these tools? And then I want to end with the EFT as kind of a really great tool to take home with us. Questions, comments, or thoughts?